Welcome to the finals of the Axis and Allies World Championship. We made it, and we are bringing you along with us. Get ready for a full blow-by-blow of the final match that'll determine who will be the very first Axis and Allies World Champions. Let's make it hot. Welcome to Board Game Nation. My name is Gary Blevins, and I had the pleasure of teaming up with Doug Thorpe to compete in the very first Axis and Allies World Championship event at Gen Con in 2023, sponsored by Renegade Games. So far, we've released the play-by-play videos for rounds 1 and 2 and our semifinal match, and all three videos have been wildly popular with more than 275,000 views and still counting. We're deeply grateful to everyone that watched them, shared their thoughts, and subscribed to the channel. Today, we are thrilled to bring you the first of two parts of our final match against a couple of Chicago natives that definitely played the role of the dark horse in this tournament. Without ever having played in a tournament before, they defeated seasoned players to make it all the way to the finals of the Axis and Allies World Championship. Want to know if they go all the way? Stay tuned. If you've missed our live streams, well, then you've missed a good time. They've been a ton of fun, and I hope that you'll join us for our next online adventure. We talk Axis and Allies strategies, tournament play, and so much more. If you can't participate live, that's okay too. They'll also be available as videos linked in the description and on the channel. You can still join the conversation by jumping into the comments of those videos. In the interest of keeping these play-by-play videos a reasonable length, we'll be saving some of the more in-depth strategy discussions for those live streams. You might notice a little graphic like this that pops up at different times in the video. That'll be there to let you know that if you're interested in learning more about that particular moment, that we're planning to talk about it in the live stream. We also want to thank our friends at Renegade Game Studios for helping to make all of this possible by sponsoring the entire video series. Renegade is the current publisher of Axis and Allies, but they also have loads of other great games that I've enjoyed sharing with you throughout this series. To learn more about everything Renegade has to offer, you can visit your friendly local game store or use the link in the description. Now it's time for the Choose Your Own Adventure portion of the show. Please hang out for a second as our menu options have recently changed. If you've watched any of the earlier rounds of this series, thank you very much. You can jump to this time code and enjoy. If you're brand new here, please stay where you are. We have some information that'll help the rest of this video make more sense. The Axis and Allies World Championship Tournament is a single elimination tournament with 4 rounds of play. Over the course of those rounds, Doug and I took notes on the action and snapped pictures of all the games that we played and some that we didn't. So over the past few weeks, using our notes and pictures from the event, I've reconstructed those games here in the studio and taken much more detailed pictures. Now, using those pictures, Doug and I are going to walk you through a game from each of the 4 rounds leading up to an incredible final match. Our hope is that you'll be able to follow the action of the games as we move through them, and with any luck, you'll get a sense of what it was like to be at the table. We really want to get this right, so please let us know what you think in the comments below. And while you're down there, go ahead and subscribe and hit the bell so that when the next games are ready, you'll get a notification. A quick disclaimer. I did my best to recreate the games as accurately as possible, but things happened in the heat of a game and during the recreation process that may have caused some minor details to get lost in translation. Still, I'm confident that any minor discrepancies wouldn't have made any significant difference to the outcome of any of the games we're going to talk about. Also, in the pictures, you're going to see the different colored chips offset like this. This was done intentionally to make it easier to see. In reality, they stack just fine. With some minor variations, casual play and online play have basically the same rules. Because tournaments have lots of players and a limited amount of time, the rules for tournament play have some significant differences. Now, if you're already familiar with those differences, you can jump ahead to this part of the video and get into the game. If not, stay right here for a quick overview. The 2023 World Championship for Axis and Allies was determined over the 1942 Second Edition board. There are 3 big rules differences that you need to know. Number 1, players bid for sides. Rather than a random draw, if both teams wish to play the same side, they'll start a bidding process that, when completed, may allow the players accepting a bid to place additional units on the map prior to the start of the game. A good bid and the placement of those units can make a huge difference in a game. A while back, we made a video that lays out all of the rules for bidding. If you want to know more about that, you can follow this link right here. Number 2, in tournament play, the Larry Harris Gen Con 3.0 setup is used. The 3.0 setup adds some UK units and relocates or removes some German units to create a better gameplay experience. We also made a video about that. Here's that link. Lastly, and most importantly, number 3, tournament games have a very specific time limit and win conditions. In the case of 1942.2, the game ends after 5 hours of play. If a side has achieved a standard victory in the time allowed, that's plus 3 victory cities from what they started with, they win. If that hasn't happened as the time expires, the team with the most victory cities is declared the victor. So, as you can imagine, that changes the strategies quite a bit. Now, that isn't to say that tournament strategies won't work in casual or online play, but their target is a bit different. The time limit shifts the goal to controlling more victory cities than your opponent when the time expires, rather than trying to hold 9 or 10 victory cities. In 1942.2, that means controlling 7 or more when the clock runs out. This rule set lends itself to much more aggressive strategies and can be a ton of fun. Just keep these differences in mind as you follow along with the action. In the play-by-play video for round 1, Doug and I talked about an allied strategy that I named the Thorpe Thump. Now, it's going to be important in this video, so here are the cliff notes. The Thorpe Thump is an allied strategy for Axis and Allies 1942 Second Edition that is commonly thought of as a kill Japan first strategy. It uses the stronger US and UK economies to overload the Pacific with sea and air units. The goal is to make it impossible for Japan to defend their 3 victory cities. However, the strategy also leaves the Germans completely unchecked. As you'll see in today's video, it can definitely be a bit of a high wire act. All right, make sure your powder's dry. It's time for part 1 of the final match of the Axis and Allies 2023 World Championship. Here we go. It's been a long road, but it has arrived, the final match. I can't dive into this game properly without my teammate for that game. Please welcome Mr. Doug Thorpe.
Hey, Gary, thanks for having me again. Excited to be here.
Great to have you back, Doug. Thanks for being here. Man, it has been a heck of a road. We have played 3 great games already, and so many people have watched and shared their thoughts. We're just so grateful for everybody that's joined us for this journey. For clarification, I do answer sometimes to the bald guy, and Doug, I suppose, does answer sometimes to the guy in the glasses, but you can also feel free to use our name in the comments. I'm Gary, that's Doug. Whatever you feel, though, whatever makes you happy. We're just thrilled that you guys are here and sharing your thoughts in the comments below. And we have a very special surprise today. Our opponents from round 4 have agreed to join us for our discussion, and we are thrilled that they're here. Coming to us from their Chicagoland bunkers, please welcome John and Adam.
Thanks, Gary.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for being here. We really appreciate you joining us. Before we dive into this game, let me set the scene for our audience here a little bit. The final for this event happened on the 4th day of Gen Con, which is the largest gaming event in the world. It is absolutely amazing, and I recommend that everybody goes if you can, but it's also exhausting. Now, we've already played 3 really competitive games in the past 36 hours, and for reasons passing understanding, the final for this event was scheduled to start at 8 o'clock in the morning on Sunday. Now, needless to say, we were all tired, and our brains might not have been firing on all cylinders. Well, I can certainly say that mine was not. Still, I think everybody played a really good game, but let's just say that I wouldn't call it perfect play. So before you comment, please be kind. Without any further ado, let's dive in. The Axis and Allies World Championship in 2023 was settled over the 1942 Second Edition map using the Larry Harris Gen Con 3.0 setup, and who plays which side is decided by a bidding process. After rolling to see who's going to go first, John and Adam got to bid or defer. They opted to defer, leaving Doug and I to bid first. We said that we wanted to play the Axis, and we offered them a bid of 2 to take the Allies. They declined and countered. They said they wanted to play the Axis and that they would be willing to pay us 3 to play the Allies. We agreed, accepting a bid of the Allies plus 3, meaning that we'd be able to place 3 IPCs worth of units into any Allied territory that already had troops in it.
We learned how to bid on the way down to Indianapolis watching your YouTube, Gary. What is this bidding thing? Pull up a YouTube on it.
Well, thanks for watching. I'm glad that it helped. We knew when we accepted the bid that we were going to be using the Thorpe Thump, which is a strategy developed by my esteemed partner that focuses all of the UK and US players' attention on flooding the Pacific with sea and air units and pushing Japanese land units out of mainland Japan, with the goal of making it impossible for the Japanese to defend their victory cities of Tokyo, Shanghai, and Manila. So, to further those objectives, we decided to place an additional infantry in Sichuan. Doug, what'd you think about this placement?
Yeah, it also adds a layer of protection to that fighter because that American fighter can be pretty key. So we want to be sure we hang on to that for sure.
John, did you have any thoughts on the placement here?
Yeah, I thought that was a good spot for it. I was thinking you guys were going to put another guy inside India, but for your theory or your strategy, it makes sense to put it there.
I'll add to that. The extra guy there definitely made me change my first round game plan. Had you not put that there, I likely would have been coming at that country to see if we could knock that fighter out, because I agree with you guys. That fighter is a pretty important piece there to help defend India and also just maintain America's presence there.
Well, that's good to know. I guess I feel better about having put it there. We kicked off the game with my favorite purchase for the Soviets' first turn, which is 4 infantry and 1 fighter. We saved 2 IPCs for later days and got ready to move into combat. Looking at our starting position, you can see that the Germans in West Russia are right up on our capital, so obviously we're going to need to do something about that forthwith. Now, the Larry Harris Gen Con 3.0 setup places that German bomber in Ukraine, making it a nearly irresistible target. So we went with what is widely considered in this situation to be the standard. It's called the 9-12 attack. That's sending everything that can reach to Ukraine. That means 2 Russian fighters, all 3 tanks, 3 infantry, and 1 artillery. and then everything else that can reach goes to West Russia. Let's see how it played out this time. These are actually fairly average outcomes. We've got a couple of losses in the Battle of West Russia, and we're in Ukraine with 3 tanks, and our fighters survived. Total losses, Axis lose 60 IPCs, which is the average in this particular encounter, and the Allies lose 19 IPCs with the 5 infantry and the artillery. Doug, how'd you feel about it?
Felt good. Came out maybe with an extra guy or so in West Russia, which feels good. And yeah, looked like it was a good start for us.
Adam, how'd you feel?
It went as normal. It was a little disappointing for us. We would have liked to still have that bomber to be able to use him in Germany round 1 to help out down in Egypt, but obviously that was not a option for us this game.
Yeah, I would agree. The bomber, usually I like to see a bomber and a fighter left in Ukraine, but you were lucky enough to go ahead and advance all your tanks and your fighters. One positive outcome is that you had to leave your tanks there because you didn't get a chance to retreat them. So when Germany gets to go, we get a shot at taking out your 3 tanks.
For non-combat, we landed the fighter in Archangel. We moved the other fighter back to Caucasus. We consolidated all 7 infantry into Yakut and marched the AA gun forward into West Russia. The guy from Novosibirsk moves back to the capital in Russia. And then the guy in Kazakh stepped into Szechuan to join the now 3 infantry and American fighter that are there. Any thoughts about what this non-combat meant for the Axis, John?
Interesting landing the fighter in Archangel is the only thing I kind of just couldn't figure out a way to get to it. But yeah, interesting seeing you drop the fighter back instead of dropping him to Russia.
Yeah, we like that because it gives the opportunity, if Japan happens to land heavy in Buryatia, it gives the option for that fighter to join the 7 infantry coming back at it. Or if the Germans decide to make a big build in C-Zone 5, they can go in there and clean up anything that the UK might have to leave behind. The last non-combat move we had was sending that mighty Russian sub over to C-Zone 7 to join the British fleet.
You can't forget about that sub. That guy had some real action in Game 3.
That is true. That was a legendary battle. We mobilized our new units. We dropped the fighter and 3 infantry into Caucasus, and then the 4th infantry, of course, into Russia. As we end the Soviets' first turn, we collect 28 IPCs plus the 2 that we saved for a total of 30 IPCs. As we turn it over to the Germans, John, can you talk us through what your goals were for Germany's first turn?
We want to clear out as much naval forces on the Atlantic sides, where we decided to go after what the Americans have little of out there and then try to clear out the battleship. It's kind of important. So to clear out the Navy so UK isn't much of a threat in landing troops in, and also start producing a walk towards Russia. So we want to get some guys, and I usually bring out some infantry, and then the next round with tanks. Should I start that walking the forces towards Russia? So that's kind of the thought process, is push towards Russia and then also clear out the Navy on the Atlantic side.
Makes sense to me. Adam, anything to add?
I do want to just call out that the ability to take out that destroyer in C-Zone 11 for America, it has a huge impact on the game. That is one that I feel like never works for me in my favor when I'm America, but it has a very large impact on the game.
I'm the same. Anytime I'm America, I lose that battle.
So you guys started the German offensive with 7 infantry, 2 artillery, and the bomber. As we look at your combat moves, I thought this was pretty clever. You used the transport in C-Zone 5 to pick up 1 guy from Eastern Europe and another guy from Berlin and move them both to attack Karelia. This is, of course, a fine move, but I prefer to take Iceland because I think that's important, but I might be the only one, so you guys do what you do. You also made a big push into Ukraine with 7 infantry and 3 fighters against 3 tanks. I like your chances here. In C-Zone 7, you came over with a cruiser, a sub, 2 fighters. You were facing a battleship, a destroyer, and a submarine. You sent the battleship by itself into C-Zone 17 to try to take out the destroyer and clear the path, presumably later, for some kind of amphibious assault into Africa. And you also sent the 2 subs that started in C-Zone 9 into C-Zone 11 to go after that destroyer and 2 transports. I love this move. I normally only send 1 sub at this, but 2 is certainly a reasonable option if you have any suspicion that there might be a kill Japan first strategy on the horizon. When we look at the outcomes, of course, you had no trouble taking Karelia because it was undefended. You take the Victory City there as well as the complex. In the Ukraine, you seem to have lost 2 infantry here and taken out 3 tanks. This was really interesting to me just because of the way it shook out. The Germans lost the sub and the cruiser and both fighters, but didn't win the territory, leaving the British transport somehow still alive in C-Zone 7. This is a very unusual and pretty unlikely outcome. And of course, you didn't have any trouble taking out the destroyer in 17. That was no problem. But you did also take out the American destroyer and both transports and kept both subs in this particular battle. So this was a pretty good round of outcomes, I think, overall for the Germans, picking up Leningrad, picking up all of the offensive units in Sea Zone 7, taking out the destroyer in 17, and then the entire American Atlantic Fleet. Total losses are considerable. The Allies lose 82 IPCs in this round of combat, and the Germans lost 41. So yeah, lots of stuff on the bottom of the ocean, and some sad Russian tanks.
The battle up in Sea Zone 7, that obviously did not go as favorably as we would have liked to for Germany. But to add to that, that's another 2 planes now that Germany has lost in round 1 to go with the bomber and the fighter that we lost in the attack from Russia. And it really set Germany behind a little bit.
Moving into non-combat, the 3 fighters coming out of Ukraine, 1 goes to Germany, 2 go to Southern Europe. The transport from 15 moves over and joins the battleship, of course. And then there's a pretty good stack that forms in Poland. Any thoughts on this non-combat?
My thought was to keep the tanks protected. I didn't want to move them up to the front line because West Russia has a large amount of guys with cannon fodder. I was willing to lose the guys in Ukraine if you were to advance forward. And same thing with Finland. I didn't want to advance those guys forward in fear that you were going to take Corelli right back. So I wanted to leave some guys for a counterattack.
I got a question. I'm interested in the 2 fighters landing in Southern Europe. Is that for a push into Egypt or something? I'm not sure that I've seen that.
So I've seen where people consolidate their Navy with the UK out. So I was bringing it down just in case the UK was trying to come in the US through Africa on the north side, and then also for a Egypt push.
So as we wrap up the German non-combat moves, we take a look over the board here, and they've got a pretty good hold on Central Europe. They've got some really interesting options in the Mediterranean and out on Sea Zone 13 with those 2 fighters in Southern Europe, and the transport and the battleship still intact, so we'll be interested to see what they do with those. They mobilize their new units. Of course, this is the 7 infantry, the 2 artillery, and the bomber going into Germany. As the Germans end their turn, they collect 41 IPCs. Before we look at the UK's turn, John, can you tell us a little bit about how you got into Axis and Allies?
Started playing with Adam probably back in high school, and a couple buddies. I think we started on the original game that we actually started playing it like Risk, where you put your units wherever you want them to. No industrial complexes or anything, and you can ally. Germany and Russia were allies at one point in time, one of our games. So we kind of learned the rules as we went, and the more complexity with it, the more we grew into it.
Well, we can tell. I think there's a lot of people out there with a similar story. They've been playing for years, and they're curious about what it looks like to play at a competitive level. We're so glad that you guys came out, and it seems like you did pretty well. You made it all the way to the finals, so I think that's great. We're glad that you decided to join us. Moving on to UK 1. Doug, loving the 2 bomber and sub purchase again. Tell me about it.
With this strategy, I've often built more land units, but the 2 bombers and sub strat's been working for us, so we decided to roll with that again. For our combat movement, sent the bomber to get the transport in Sea Zone 5. We also went after those 2 pesky German subs that sunk the American East Coast fleet. Not very happy with those guys, so we decided we needed to get rid of them. We went after the Japanese fleet down there, Sea Zone 37, and then we did the double Dutch, going after Borneo and New Guinea. Trying my luck here again. Haven't been as successful with some of these as I feel like we should have been.
Well, here's how it went. The UK was successful in sinking those 2 German subs in Sea Zone 11, so that's good news. Over to the Indian Ocean. Again, a good but unusual outcome in 37. We end the combat here with 2 cruisers and a fighter left over. We did lose the carrier this time.
If we would have left the carrier down there with the 2 fighters, a counterattack would have resulted in us having to lose the fighters before the carrier. Because if we lose the carrier, Japan retreats, and then the 2 fighters just go in the drink because we didn't hit East Indies.
Agreed. And in, I believe, our round 2, people that we had played had left the aircraft carrier with the 2 fighters. And like you guys just said, we went in there, and on the very first casualty, they took off the aircraft carrier, and then we just retreated, and the 2 planes ended up crashing into the water.
Doug, you're very smart. No doubt about it. The Double Dutch, we missed everything in Borneo, but we did end up taking New Guinea with 2 infantry remaining, which is nice. But of course, those 2 transports are going to be easy targets. So as we look at the Axis losses, they lose 66 IPCs this time, including the critical C units, the battleship, the carrier, as well as those 2 fighters. It was also nice to get the transport for free in C-Zone 5 and those 2 German U-boats out of C-Zone 11, so it's nice to get rid of those guys. Unfortunately, the Allies lose 36 IPCs this time, the carrier, the fighter, the sub, and the 2 infantry that took their swing at Borneo.
It was a little unfavorable there for the Japanese, but typically, as the Japanese are starting off and you've lost all your units down there, leaving the ships over the aircraft carrier was interesting. Leaving those 2 ships, it does create a little bit of a traffic jam because they can block off some of those sea zones and make that a 1 sea zone move each turn for the Japanese. So it did put a little wrinkle into the plan that was not expected.
Moving into non-combat, we decided to try to defend Transjordan. We moved the units out of Egypt, leaving 1 guy behind to stop the tank from blitzing through. And then the fighter that survived C-Zone 37 moved all the way back to Transjordan. So hopefully that will be able to hold there. The bomber that hit the transport in C-Zone 5 landed in Kazakh. We moved the infantry from Western Canada to Eastern Canada, the infantry from South Africa to the Belgian Congo. We also sent the guy from Burma to step into Yunnan to make that a little bit harder to take. And then for reasons passing understanding, we failed to move the transport that's in C-Zone 7. Now, the one that's in 10 is there to move the tank and the guy in the next round, but the one in 7, this was clearly a mistake, and I think this was just me waiting for my coffee to kick in here. I'm not really sure. We moved into mobilization. We dropped the 2 bombers in India, of course, and then the sub in C-Zone 35. So at the end of UK 1, they collected 32 IPCs. They're +1 for taking New Guinea, and they had saved 1 in the build, so they end the turn with 33 IPCs. Doug, any thoughts as to how this turn played out?
I felt good about it. Would have loved to have gotten Borneo. But we got New Guinea and took out the Japanese fleet in 37, so no complaints other than us forgetting to move that dumb transport.
It's never there. It almost never survives the German attack. Why would I even think about it?
Exactly.
I don't know what was going on there, but I should say that I own this one. In this tournament, I was typically playing the Atlantic or Europe side of the board, and Doug was taking care of the Pacific. Now, of course, we'd look out for each other and consult on moves and all of that. But if there was something to roll for, or if there was a thing to be moved, that was basically how it broke out. So in this case, the E definitely goes to Gary. However, this is not even close to the last mistake we made in this game, so stay tuned. All right, so moving into Japan 1. Adam, tell us what your thinking was.
The concept here was to apply pressure to India as quickly as possible. That first round, we bought a bomber, 2 artillery, and 2 transports.
For combat moves, Japan stepped up into Buryatia. They attacked Anhui with 4 infantry and 1 artillery. Now, using the 2 transports and some help from the battleship and the cruiser, they landed in Yunnan with 2 infantry and artillery and a tank. The guy in Kwangtung also joined in that fight. One of the guys from French Indochina, Thailand stepped over into Burma. They sent the fighter from Japan to take out the transport in 47 and used the sub to get the transport in 49. They also went after the 2 cruisers in C-Zone 37 with 2 fighters and their bomber. A very busy combat for J1. Before we look at how all that went, Adam, can you tell us a little bit about how you came to be playing at the Axis and Allies World Championship at Gen Con?
As we got a little bit more sophisticated with the game and learned the rules and stopped placing pieces anywhere we wanted on the board, it seemed like some of the friends got a little less interested in the game, and it turned into John and myself playing a lot just against each other. When we had the opportunity to come out and experience a tournament and play against some other people, besides ourselves, I jumped at that opportunity with him, and it was a really, really fun experience, and I highly recommend it to anybody who's out there that is in a similar position to us where we've only played against our friends. It really opens up the horizons and introduces you to some different tactics that you may never have seen before.
Adam, thank you so much for sharing. We're so glad that you played and had a good time, and thanks for encouraging other folks to come. With as many people have seen these videos, we're expecting big turnouts at the Gen Con 2024 event, and we'll have more information about that on this channel as we have it. So if you're interested in anything having to do with tournament play, make sure that you subscribe here and follow us on Facebook. Now, without any further ado, let's see how the combat moves played out for Japan this time. They, of course, had no trouble taking Buryatia because it was unopposed. In Ennui, they end up with 3 guys and an artillery, which is a pretty good stack, still standing there. And in Yunnan, I believe they lost 1 infantry here, but killed all 3 of the Allied units. Of course, they step into Burma without any trouble. Same thing with the transports that were left over in 47 and 49. Those are headed to the deep. And then in 37, they did get both cruisers, but they did lose 1 of their fighters here. Losses in this particular round, the Axis lose 16 IPCs, including 1 of their critical fighters, but the Allies lose 53 IPCs worth of material. That's both cruisers, 2 transports, and 5 infantry. So this is not the kind of math that you're hoping for if you're an Allied player, but not particularly unusual. As we look at their non-combat, they consolidated a big chunk of the fleet into 61. Did land the air units coming out of 37 in French Indochina, Thailand, and the fighter that picked off the transport in 47 landed in Borneo. The destroyer is moved from 60 into 62. One last thing, the guy from Malala did walk forward into French Indochina, Thailand, which is important. It's a thing that a lot of people often forget. And as we look across all their non-combat moves, Adam, any thoughts?
I think things had gone pretty well for us here. It is costly losing that 1 fighter down in, around the East Indies, but I thought at this point in time it was necessary to clear out those UK ships. As of right now, the plan that I came into the game with was working pretty reasonable and pretty happy at the state.
So they mobilize the 2 transports into 62 and, of course, the bomber into Japan. And they end Japan 1, collecting 33 IPCs. Moving over to US 1. Other than the loss of the Atlantic fleet, we've got a pretty reasonable board state. The Pacific fleet is intact because the Japanese didn't go after the fleet in Pearl Harbor, which is nice. So we move on to what I think is probably the trademark of the Thorpe Thumb strategy, the purchase of 2 carriers, a fighter, and saving 4 IPCs in the first round. For combat, we decided to move into the middle of the Pacific and attack Wake Island. We decided to attack Yunnan with the 3 infantry and the fighter in Sichuan. So how did it all work out? We didn't get great math here. We end up retreating with the fighter because obviously we did not want to lose the fighter. But we did get rid of their infantry and their artillery, but the tank did remain. We were, of course, successful in taking Wake Island. And when we look at the total losses for the US 1, not a ton of casualties here, but the Axis lose 10 IPCs. That's the 2 infantry, the artillery, and the Americans lose the 9. For non-combat moves, we consolidated into C-Zone 52. We moved the bomber over to the Hawaiian Islands, ended with 2 fighters in 56, which are going to be on one of the carriers that are coming over. And we started marching guys west from the eastern United States to central United States, and they'll eventually make their way over to San Francisco. They'd have taken some transports, but some sneaky subs got, well, sneaky, and took away that option. The fighter that was part of the battle in Yunnan makes its way down to the party in India. And as we look over all of the Americans' non-combat moves, Doug, can you talk about why we consolidated in C-Zone 52?
My idea of going with Wake Island is it puts the American fleet immediately within range of 2 victory cities, and the only thing that can reach us is Japanese air units. And it didn't seem like they would have enough air to get to us to really be able to affect our fleet in a significant way. So I felt like putting quick pressure on was really significant, especially with what we're planning on UK's turn in UK round 2 with hitting part of the Japanese Navy. I feel like it already puts Japan in a tight spot when you have units within range of Manila and Tokyo, even though I don't know that we have a realistic shot at Tokyo, but it just makes the Japanese player be on us. Whereas if we would have gone south to the Solomon Islands or just hung back on the West Coast, then they don't have any threats and they can go about their business. But it takes some pressure off of India when you push into the center like this with America right off the bat.
We mobilized our new units, which is the 2 carriers and the additional fighter. At the end of the US's first turn, they collect 40 IPCs. They have saved 4, so they ended the turn with 40 IPCs. Adam, what did you think as Japan after you saw America's opening?
The Calcutta Crush is not going to happen. I immediately need to be changing direction and really starting to help reinforce my naval and trying to bolster that up before the American fleet can get there.
So as we look at the end of round one, we can look around the board here and see that, yep, the Americans are landing heavy in the Pacific, leaving the Atlantic pretty well alone. India has a couple of big bombers in it, adding the firepower of the bomber in Kazakh. So yeah, there's a lot going on here, and it's clear that most of the focus is going to be on the Pacific theater and the victory cities that Japan is now going to have to try to defend. Unfortunately, the Russians are going to have to try to handle the Germans alone, which is always a good time. This is the only statistic that really matters. What is the current victory city tally? You can be raining down the dollars, but if you don't have the victory cities, you can't win. At the end of this round, the Axis are in the lead, 7, and the Allies with 6, because the Axis have scored a win in Leningrad, or it was given to them. It was, we try to be friendly. It's a friendly game.
We walked in or anything.
Right. It's not like they just walked in and took it for free or anything. But they do control it now. We have to concede at this point that the Axis is in the lead. My friends, I am thrilled to be able to tell you about one of my favorite games today, Diplomacy. Diplomacy's been around for a long time, but that's not why it's a classic. It's engaging combination of cooperation and competition, playing out against a backdrop of political and military maneuvering, makes Diplomacy a truly one-of-a-kind gaming experience. Designed by Alan B. Cullimer, Diplomacy is a deep strategy game for 2 to 7 players ages 12 and up, plays in about 4 hours, and is available now through Renegade Game Studios. Set in Europe just before World War I, players control one of the era's 7 major powers engaging in negotiations, alliance building, and the inevitable backstabbing, in hopes of expanding their dominance across the continent. No cards or dice in this game, so luck can't save you. Diplomacy is a game of pure strategy and guile that is now even easier to learn. Renegade's printing of the game has an updated rulebook and very handy quick start guide to get new players going. To get your copy of Diplomacy by Renegade Game Studios, visit your local game store or follow the link in the description below. We will see you at the table and watch your back. Turning it over to the Soviets for their second turn, we look across the board and they're in a pretty reasonable position. They decide to spend all 30 of their IPCs to buy 8 infantry and a tank. That tank is designed to make the run for Shanghai later if necessary, because we're not in a terrible position at the moment, but that can change. For our combat moves, we decided to liberate Karelia. Mostly here, we just don't want the Germans to be able to build there this early in the game. We don't expect to be able to hold this territory for very long, but we decided to make a run at it with 2 infantry and artillery and 1 of our fighters. And we make another push into Ukraine. They've got 6 infantry there. We're coming with 7 infantry and artillery, a tank, and 2 fighters against 6 infantry. We're a 99.7% chance of success here, and I don't know why we have the graphic on the screen, but oh, wait. We got crushed. This was absolutely brutal. This was one of the worst rolls I may have ever seen in my life. It was the craziest thing. We were all playing with the same dice, the ones that came from the box. I was rolling for the Russians. John was rolling for the Germans. I would pick up however many dice it was, and I would roll them, and they would be all misses. And then John would pick up those very same dice, roll, and get hits. After the 3rd round of that, we retreated with the artillery, the tank, and the fighters before I chucked those dice across the gaming hall at Gen Con. I didn't actually do that, but man, I was tempted. On the upside, we did Karelia without taking any losses. The Axis lost 15 IPCs, and the Allies lost 21. Yeah, this stung.
Horrible.
So that was fun.
It took 7 of our men to kill 3 of his in Ukraine.
Very true, but I tried to shake it off, and you got to stay out of quicksand. You got to stay out of quicksand. You got to keep it level.
It was bad, really bad.
After those really exciting outcomes, we look at our non-combat moves. We had 2 guys in Russia. We sent 1 guy to West Russia and then another guy into Caucasus. We did, however, not have a lot of confidence in our ability to defend Caucasus, so we landed our fighters in Russia. The Germans can get there with just too much material at this point, but we don't want to make it easy for them to take it either. At the same time, we marched the AA gun from West Russia back into Moscow, so it's going to be hanging out there. But everybody on the eastern side of the map stayed where they are, which brings us to our second critical error of the game. During our combat moves, we overlooked what should have been an obvious move, which was to send all 7 of the infantry from Yakut to wipe out the 1 guy standing in Buryatia and create a really, really important landing space for the Allies. As soon as I started rolling, I remembered it and I saw it, and I remember being at the table looking at Doug and saying, I really wanted to take Buryatia. And then he turned and said, I really wanted you to take it too. And we were both just facepalm because it's really important to the Thorpe Thump to be able to have a good spot for American air units to get across the Pacific and land safely. But we didn't do that.
We dropped the ball on that. We should have hit it hard because it would have been really important, as we'll see.
For mobilization, we land 4 infantry in Caucasus, the other 4 infantry into Russia with the tank, in hopes that the Germans won't be able to land there with so much force that we won't be able to punch back. So we're hoping to be able to retake it on Russia 3. At the end of the Russian second turn, we got a problem in the old Soviet republics. I'd be curious, John, what your thinking was on how the Russian combat went and your situation as we move into Germany too.
Seeing Russia go on an offensive is kind of a different strategy I've never seen before. We actually come at Germany pretty aggressively. But no, I was very thrilled with how that battle turned out at the Ukraine. So I couldn't ask for anything better. So with America kind of pushing towards the Pacific, I decided to buy all tanks and a fighter to kind of help get over to Russia as fast as I could.
Certainly makes sense to me. For combat moves, Germany pushed back into Karelia with 3 infantry from Finland and 3 fighters. They made a big assault on Caucasus, moving in with 4 infantry, 6 tanks, and an offshore bombardment from the battleship. They also sent a bomber to take out that transport in Sea Zone 7.
Thank you for that, freebie.
You're welcome.
Hey, like I said, it's a friendly game. We like to give where we can. All right, let's see how the rest of it turned out for you. Of course, you accepted the gift of the transport in Sea Zone 7 in the spirit that it was intended. You got into Karelia and took no losses, and same thing in Egypt, moving in, taking out the 1 guy that was there, not taking any losses. In Caucasus, the Russians, and by the Russians I mean me, had another round of impossibly bad dice. I couldn't hit anything.
At this point, we fired Gary from rolling any more dice for the rest of the game.
That's probably for the best, really, I think.
That was one of the worst strings of rolling that I've ever seen. It was so bad.
Obviously, this was another brutal turn for the Allies, as you can see by the total losses. All in, the Axis lost 6 IPCs, and the Allies lost 50. That's 7 infantry, 2 artillery, and a tank that got 2 hits total. It hurt my soul. I'm not gonna lie. I had to take a walk after this one and regroup. I'm usually pretty steady when it comes to having a round of bad dice. I understand luck, and it's gonna work out over time. But man, this was 2 or 3 big losses in a row, and now it's like 8:45 in the morning, and I'm still sucking on my coffee trying to find some kind of mojo or something. But I will say that I was plenty awake after this turn was over. This is how all their non-combat moves shake out. They end up with 6 tanks in Caucasus with 2 infantry, 3 infantry in Karelia. They mobilize the new units. That's 5 shiny new tanks and a fighter into Germany, which I think is looking pretty scary. So at the end of Germany 2, they collected 45 IPCs. They had the 1 that they had saved, and they end with a total of 46 IPCs. Over to the UK for their second turn. They've got a pretty good list of things that they want to get done. Doug, you want to walk us through them?
First of all, we need to crank up the defense in India, but also give ourselves some offensive punch. So we went with a 3-fighter build. We want to be sure that we hang on to India because there is a lot of pressure against us given where all the Japanese units are at. And then second of all, given the position of our bombers, we can hit the Japanese naval purchase of the 2 transports and destroyer, which we want to do because we don't want them to keep bringing land units across to reinforce Asia or even Manila. We also wanted to hit Burma because it prevents some additional land units getting into India. It prevents the tank from blitzing, and because there's 2 transports there, they can only bring in 4 land units instead of the possibility of 6 land units coming in for a potential hit on India. So we felt like it was worth attacking out to Burma. Took 2 infantry to be sure that even if they hit us in return fire that we capture the territory. We take the 2 bombers against the destroyer and the 2 transports off of the coast of Japan, and feeling pretty good about our chances in these battles.
I really love this move into Burma. By stepping in to take Burma, as you mentioned, it means fewer land units that can reach India, which is helpful, but it also eliminates the landing zone for the bomber that's starting in Japan. So while it might seem counterintuitive to move any units out of India, taking Burma actually increases the chances that it'll withstand a full Japanese assault. I thought this was a great move. Moving into the outcomes, we were successful in taking out the destroyer and the 2 transports in 62, taking no losses in that battle, which is nice. And we were able to take out the guy in Burma, again, without taking any losses. Both the infantry are still standing there. So in this round, it's a little bit of a reverse, but not quite as severe. The Axis lose 25 IPCs this time, and the Allies lost 0. As we start looking at the non-combat moves, we made an interesting choice, I think, here. We bring the 2 fighters from London down to French West Africa, plus the guy and the tank from Eastern Canada. So we're, in theory here, threatening the German units that have just taken Egypt. We may not be able to take them out, but we can certainly slow them down. But there's also the ability to bounce back towards Paris or even into the Mediterranean if that should happen to open up. Did you have any particular thoughts about this one, Doug?
Felt like Russia was in a lot of trouble at this point, so trying to get our fighters, even if it took a long route into Asia, was pretty significant. And yeah, again, it puts us in a position to defend part of Africa, maybe keep our IPCs from getting eaten up there, but we can still hit Paris from this position. So we got to keep Germany honest as far as that's concerned.
In the Pacific, we land the fighter and the bomber back in India, and we move the tank from Transjordan across to India. The infantry and the artillery make it from Transjordan over to Persia. The 2 bombers from 62 that survived, of course, go and they land in Yakut. We mobilize the 3 fighters in India, which gives us a total of 4 UK fighters there and the American fighter there, along with the bomber, 2 infantry, a tank, and an AA gun. So there's a pretty reasonable defense there at this point. The UK ends its second turn, collecting 30 IPCs. They have saved 2 from the previous round, and they end the turn with 32 IPCs. Over to Japan 2. Adam, what do you think?
At this point in time, Japan is rethinking their strategy. We have a very large American fleet knocking on our door. Additionally, losing those 2 transports from 62 really puts an end to any attempt at the Calcutta Crush, because that's 4 additional infantry that I'm not able to get down this turn into the Burma area. So we're scrapping the plan and really starting to think through how now to defend the east side of Asia and the Philippines and Japan.
That definitely seems like a wise course of action. To that end, Japan purchases a carrier, a fighter, and 3 infantry. For their combat moves, they start by taking advantage of our failure to take Buryatia by sending a guy to pick up the Soviet Far East for free, further weakening Russia. They send in artillery, a tank, and a bomber to take out the last Russian soldier in Szechuan. They also send a guy from Anhui to take Sinkang. They were successful in all 3 encounters and took no losses. So a pretty quiet round of combat here. The Allies lost 3 IPCs and the Axis lost 0.
Back to Gary's rolls.
Oh yeah, that checks out. For non-combat, they landed the bomber in Manchuria. The 2 guys in Anhui moved back to Kiangsu to prepare for the defense of Shanghai. They sent 1 of the transports from 61 down to 36, picked up the 2 infantry in Finch Indochina, Thailand, moved over to 48, and dropped them into Manila. That's going to leave the transport undefended, so it'll be easy pickings later. But it's really important in this situation, I think, to get as many guys into Manila as you can. They also moved the sub down to 46 to get away from the American destroyers and to threaten the sea zone in 35, in the event that the UK decides to buy, transports. But obviously, the headline here is the consolidation of the fleet into 60 to face down the U.S. Navy. Adam, any thoughts on where all this was going?
We moved the entire fleet back to 60 to help protect Japan, because losing the capital, obviously you lose your IPCs, and that would have really been the end of the game at that point.
Certainly a wise precaution. So as the Japanese mobilized, they dropped their 3 new infantry into Japan and mobilized the fighter and the carrier into Sea Zone 60. They ended the turn collecting 35 IPCs. As we turn the action over to the Americans, we can see that Japan definitely has good reason to be concerned about that U.S. Navy. However, this is where the Russians' failure to take Buryatia really comes back to bite us. Let's look at the math. As we look at all the units that can reach Sea Zone 60, it's a considerable American force, there's no doubt about that. But there's also a pretty solid defense here. Still, if needed, the UK can come behind to try to clean up. Unfortunately for the Americans, a key unit isn't going to be able to join in on that attack. Without the control of Buryatia, the bomber in Hawaii can't reach the battle and still have a safe place to land. So if the US were to attack now, there'd be a coin flip, essentially, to clear the zone entirely. But if the Russians would have taken Buryatia and the US were able to add that bomber, it would have taken the odds of success here up to 78%, which, knowing Doug the way that I do, would have been more than enough to make us go, especially knowing that the UK would be able to come behind and clean up anything that was still there. So the Soviet misstep on their second turn really came back to bite us here because we had an opportunity early in the game to really close the door on Japan. Now, of course, this is all with ready access to odds calculators and a good night's sleep and perfect hindsight and all of that. So I'm just going to go ahead and blame this one on my caffeine deprived fog.
When we're playing in a game, we don't have battle calculators, so we're doing the best that we can. It just didn't look like, we didn't know it was exactly 48%, but it didn't seem like it was worth it. So it seems like the play here for America is to continue to exert pressure against Japan, build more, and make it a more sure attack when we decide to pull the trigger. Because we lost the two transports off of the East Coast, this time we built two transports, and then again to bolster that offensive force of the Navy, we built two bombers, and that left us with 6 IPCs. So we bought an additional sub. As far as combat, we went to Iwo Jima. Again, the idea here is we have a very defensive Navy with all of our carriers and fighters, and we're just pressing up against the Japanese Navy even more, setting ourselves up to maybe hit them in the next round if they don't respond. They can't move away from the place they're in, or else we have moves against their capital, or we could even slip through the sea zone and hit either Shanghai or slip south and hit Manila. So it gives us a couple of options as far as additional attacks in the future, but we wanted to go to Iwo, went ahead and attack the territory, take it, so it can't be used as a landing place for them, but it can be used as a landing place for us that can strike again out at those victory cities, put our bombers there to exert some more pressure and force against Japan, not just their Navy, but their cities as well.
I like it. So when we look at the outcomes, the Americans were successful in taking Iwo Jima. And again, thankfully, without taking any losses. They were there with 5 fighters and 2 guys against 1 guy. So they had pretty good odds. It's nice to be able to preserve that American land unit because those are critically important. But total losses in this round, the Axis only lose 3 IPCs, the Allies lose 0. They end the non-combat stacked up heavy in 59 with the fighter in Burma and the bomber in New Guinea. As we move on to mobilization, we drop our 2 transports, the sub, and the 2 bombers into the appropriate places. Then we realize, oh wait, the Japanese air units can hit that with the fighters that are in C-Zone 60. And because the subs can't hit air units, they can take them essentially for free. But because there are no kamikazes in this game, that also means that at least one of those Japanese carriers will need to come away from Japan to pick it up, creating a bit of a trap for the Japanese fleet here. Now, I would like to tell you that we laid this trap as part of some brilliant master plan, but I don't like to lie. This is a mistake that I saw just as the round ended, and the potential loss of those 2 transports could be a big problem for the Americans, but taking them out while defending the fleet and the victory cities is going to be a challenge for the Japanese. So we'll definitely be keeping an eye on that here. Oh, and this is when I wrote down in all caps in my notebook, slow down. Still, the game marches on and the Americans' turn ends, collecting 38 IPCs. So at the end of round 2, we can see the Japanese have fortified Japan pretty well, and they're trying to get more guys to Manila and Shanghai. When we look over to the European theater, it is looking pretty grim for the Russians. The Germans have taken Caucasus and are unlikely to give it up at this point because they've got such a strong force there. Because, I don't know, whatever Jamoke they have rolling for the Russians can't seem to roll a hit to save his life. I don't know what that guy's problem is. I mean, hopefully he gets some new dice or turns around 3 times and spits or something. That guy needs to work it out. Once again, this is the only number that matters, is the victory city tally. The Axis are still in the lead. 7-6. They still hold all of theirs plus Leningrad. The Allies are going to need to make some changes here. But we turn it over to the Russians to start the round, and they decide to spend all of their IPCs to purchase 7 infantry and another tank in hopes of bolstering or at least running for their lives. We're not entirely sure what's going to happen here. We looked very, very carefully, trying to decide whether or not the Germans were going to be able to step in here. Felt like they might, for sure. But we made our combat moves. We remembered to move into Buryatia this time, but we wanted to make sure that we could stay behind and defend the UK bombers. So we left 5 infantry there in case that German bomber, which can make the trip from Berlin and land in the Soviet Far East, we didn't want to give them the opportunity to pick off our bombers with theirs. So for our only other combat this turn, we decided to take a swipe at the Germans in Caucasus. The idea here is that we would sweep out there, use the infantry as a shield so that the fighters and the tank could do some damage, and then presumably retreat back to Russia. The goal was to take out their infantry and a few of the tanks to make the attack on Moscow a bit harder for the Germans. Unfortunately, I was the one who picked up the dice, and you'll be shocked to see how this worked out. We got shellacked again in the old Caucasus and lost, I don't know, 4 infantry and a tank, and only took out 2 of their guys. So, again, that wasn't great. The Axis lost 6 IPCs. The Allies lost 18. It's just a 3-to-1 ratio. It's no big deal. I'm sure the Russians can keep doing that over and over again without any repercussions, right? But I'm glad to report, though, that we did take Buryatia without any trouble. That might also have to do with the fact that I didn't have to roll any dice to take that one. Good news, I suppose, is that we didn't lose any of our Soviet fighters, so they've moved during non-combat back into Moscow. The one remaining guy that we left behind in Russia stepped forward into Kazakh to prevent the Japanese tank from having a chance to blitz through into Moscow. The guy from Belarus also stepped back into West Russia. We mobilized into Moscow, of course, because we don't have any other place to mobilize anymore because all of our industrial complexes are now eating sauerkraut. We put our 7 infantry and the tank into Russia and hope. When the Soviets ended their turn, they collected 21 IPCs and turned it over to the Germans.
We were looking at not exactly attacking Russia yet. We were getting more tanks to kind of move over and then also buy some infantry to bolster the Western Front. Plan was to buy tanks, put them over either Karelia or the Caucasus, and then the infantry over in Germany is what we were thinking, and take a shot at Russia the next turn.
Right, which certainly explains the purchase of 3 infantry, 5 tanks, and the AA gun. For your combat moves, you sent a guy stepping forward into Belarus, which made perfect sense to me. You sent the infantry from Ukraine with an artillery and 3 fighters to squash the guy in West Russia. You went down to Anglo-Egypt, Sudan to try to start to clear out the African theater. You also stepped a guy over into Transjordan to take that for free. When we look at the outcomes, of course, you took Belarus for free. You were able to take out the one guy in West Russia and the guy in Anglo-Egypt, Sudan. You did lose 1 guy, lost 3 IPCs this time. The Allies lost 6. For non-combat moves, you moved a bunch of tanks up into Leningrad and staged for what would be the G4 attack into Moscow. That was bolstered by infantry moving forward into Ukraine, additional tanks moving forward into Caucasus, the fighters landing in Caucasus. So if there was any hope that the Russians were going to be able to try to push out and take this at some point in the future, that is rapidly diminishing. One of the things that's really hard for the Axis to do compared to the Allies is for those 2 teams to help each other. So it's often overlooked the Japanese fighters can make it into the European theater, and the German fighters can make it into the Asian theater. Here you landed 2 fighters in Sichuan. After hitting West Russia, they moved over to Sichuan. I thought this was a really solid choice, and I would say that I was happy that you saw this because I think it's a really good move, but it's really kind of bad for us. When German air units start making their way into the Asian theater, this makes the Thorpe Thump much more difficult. So I thought this was a really good move for the Axis, but I was sad kind of to see it in the moment. The Germans mobilized 2 tanks into Karelia and 3 more and the AA gun into Caucasus. And then the 3 infantry landed in Germany. When we stack it all up, there's 11 tanks in Caucasus now, joined by 2 fighters and the AA gun. I wonder if you can tell us about this AA gun purchase and placement.
Never playing in Russia that had an air force. I'm used to, when we play, it's just us, and it's mainly a defensive Russia. So let's call this my quicksand. I didn't know what to do and how to stop your air power because you kept always picking at me and then flying away. So I was like, at least this time I'll get a shot at your fighters. And maybe I'll get lucky and strike one of them.
More likely is that I would just crash on the thing, right? I mean, Germany ends their 3rd turn collecting a whopping 51 IPCs, which is a lot. We turn it over to UK for their 3rd turn. What do you think?
At this point in the game, the Russian capital is in some serious trouble, so the UK needs to come up with something. We need to get the land units out of Asia as fast as possible to give us a shot at Shanghai, and then potentially try to do something to bring a little bit of the heat off of Russia. So we talked about this build for a while. We ended up going with 3 tanks and an aircraft carrier for our build with Britain. This allows us to move our Navy from the coast of Africa up to attack Paris. Another thing that was interesting that Germany did was they actually cut off our path through Africa with the two fighters that we landed in Africa. So it was another reason for doing the carrier. Like, we want to do something with those fighters, and they just can't get through ultimately to get to India anymore at this point. So we take a shot at Paris at this point, trying to draw a little bit of the heat off of the Russians. And then in the Pacific, we go after that transport. We go for the artillery in French Indochina, pick up Yunnan, and then we send our bombers after the units that are in Manchuria, trying to get rid of that bomber so it's not threatening the US fleet or anything else. And again, trying to knock out some of those land units that are in Asia. That seemed like one of the best bang for our buck opportunities.
All right, so here's how it went. In Manchuria, we went with the 3 bombers and left with 2 of them, but we did get rid of the infantry and the Japanese bomber that were there, so that was a positive. We got into French Indochina, Thailand without taking any losses, and of course, we sank the transport that was hanging out in 48.
I think it was really important for us to get that Japanese bomber because even though we pressed up with the US fleet, the numbers are actually uncomfortably even if Japan wants to take a swing at the US, but getting rid of that bomber really puts us in a position that I feel really solid about the US fleet in its position.
And then I decided to try to roll again in France, and that went, as normal. I hit nothing. We lost everything. That's just kind of becoming my thing now. That was a 7% chance of that outcome. For those of you keeping track at home, that's a 7% chance there. And I always was lucky. That's kind of how I look at it. I always was the outlier, as it were. After the stellar performance in France, the Allies lose 21 IPCs total, and the Axis lose 29 IPCs. That's their bomber, which was really important, the transport, and then 3 more land units out of Asia. For non-combat, the 2 fighters that were left in French West Africa, not being able to make it over to India anymore, came back up to Sea Zone 8, where they will land on the carrier when that comes in. We mobilized the new units. We put the 3 tanks in India and the carrier in Sea Zone 8 to catch the 2 fighters that are there. Part of the thinking here was that most of the air power for the Germans has moved pretty far to the east, making the Atlantic a little bit more inviting. So the only unit that can really attack Sea Zone 8 is the bomber. And from where they are in Sea Zone 8, they're threatening 3 victory cities at the moment. So they can make a run at Paris, they can make a run at Berlin. The Germans now also have to keep somebody in Leningrad because the UK can swing in and pick that up. So it just creates some noise for the Germans here.
We landed our Air Force with the UK in Burma. The reason I wanted to get all of our Air Force there is because we wanted it to be within range of Shanghai. That was really important at this stage of the game. I mean, we're getting down to 2 to 3 turns left given time, and we have to be able to hit that victory city with our air. So we had to put all of that stuff there, front load it in order that it could get there, with the idea of maybe Russia coming down and making more landing zones along the coast in Manchuria.
An excellent point. The UK ends the turn collecting 31 IPCs. We turn it over to the Japanese. What are you thinking about your position?
At this point in time, we're trying to reinforce the victory cities. We have 1 transport still out there that we can shuttle some troops around to either the mainland or down into Manila. And then we're also trying to bolster up the defense in Japan at this point. So the purchase of the 7 guys in the fighter are really to help bolster the defense.
Japan only has 1 combat move in this round. They decide to have a fighter use 3 of its 4 moves to sink the exposed transports in Sea Zone 56. Because the fighter and the sub can't hit each other, and the transports have no defensive capability, they're immediately destroyed, meaning that on J3, the Allies lost 14 IPCs and the Axis lost 0. Their non-combat move here is where it got a little bit tricky for them. Because the fighter in 56 only has 1 move left, Japan is now obligated to send a carrier out to 57 to give it a place to land. No kamikaze attacks in this version. So, deciding not to send their entire fleet so far away from their victory cities, Japan sent 1 carrier out to 57 to catch the fighter and split up the rest of the units. They landed the fighters in Japan and left a destroyer in 60 as a blocker for the rest of their fleet, now in 61. When defending against the Thorpe Thump, Japan is typically forced to choose between defending Manila or Shanghai. Their move here made it pretty clear to me that they wanted to make sure that they held on to Shanghai. After mobilizing everybody in Japan, they've got 10 infantry, 2 artillery, 2 fighters, and a bomber and an AA gun. certainly an uninviting target. They end the turn collecting 31 IPCs. They saved 4 from last time, so they end with 35 total. As we turn it over to the U.S. for their third turn, Doug, what do you think?
America has options here. One thing that was really clear from the beginning is we need to, again, exert force. So we went with a build of 3 bombers to get as much out there as we can as quickly as we could. We don't really have time for more Navy. My stomach sank when I realized my blunder of putting those 2 unprotected transports out there. But we did realize that if I could just hit that carrier with 2 subs, and if we destroy it, then the fighter has nowhere to land and it just goes in the drain. Now, the other decision we have to make here is, what do we do with America's force? We could pick off the destroyer just to lessen the amount of naval units they have. We could actually fly our fighters over the destroyer and hit the bulk of the Japanese Navy, try to take out that battleship carrier and cruiser and their final transport. That was really, really tempting to do. My fear with that was it may leave America in a position where they can't get a victory city if we lose too much air doing that. So we ultimately said we need a victory city. Let's just go for Manila. And that's where we ended up going. We took our battleship cruiser, the 2 infantry, and our 5 fighters and the bomber, and felt like that was good. We didn't want to spread our Navy out too much. The great thing about the sea zone around the Philippines is because it's immediately next to Tokyo and Shanghai, it creates that fork that we've talked about before, and the sea zone can't get blocked. So instead of putting extra units to go after the destroyer, just didn't feel like it was worth it. We wanted to consolidate our Navy, be strong, and be safe. So we just went everything all in there in order to get that victory city. Went with the 2 subs after the carrier itself.
Well, and here's how it went. The Japanese carrier was sunk in 57, leaving that fighter alone, as Doug mentioned, and it did sink at the end of combat. We were successful in taking Manila. We took out the 3 infantry and the artillery there, but we did lose 1 of the 2 infantry and the bomber. While we are happy to have eked into the lead in the victory city count for now, that leaves just 1 dude in Manila as the last remaining American land unit in reach of any Axis victory cities.
Yeah, I'm dying right now. I've never seen America so thin with land units. Like, America needs a land unit. You can't capture stuff with air. So that's why we lost the bomber. I felt like I had to have those fighters in order to defend my Navy. It's worth losing the bomber. I have 3 bombers coming up, but losing those transports and then this infantry was just a gut punch. I just felt sick to my stomach after this.
The Axis lose 37 IPCs this time, with its carrier and fighter with being the bulk of those forces, and then the land units that were in Manila. And then the Allies lost the bomber and 1 of the infantry in that attack for a total of 15 IPCs. Non-combat moves, the fighters move back out to 48 to land on the carriers as they move in. The bombers in western United States took the red eye and made it all the way to Yunnan, so they'll be in a position to attack on US 4. We mobilized the 3 new bombers into San Francisco, and the Americans ended their turn with collecting 39 IPCs, saved 4, ending with a total of 43 IPCs. So at the end of round 3, it's starting to look a little better for the Pacific side of the map, but the Europe side is not feeling great about where they are. Russian capital is under serious threat. They may or may not be able to defend it. The math is not looking great for the defense. The Germans are certainly on the march with 11 tanks in the Caucasus, 6 or 7 more in Leningrad, 8 more in Leningrad, plus the new infantry that are knocking on the door in West Russia and Archangel, plus several new air units. So yeah, it's not looking great for Moscow, but it's also not looking great for Japan. They've already lost 1 of their victory cities. They've got 1 more that's under serious threat, and there may even be a shot at their capital. But in the end, again, this is the only number that matters, the victory city tally. And now, the Axis have 6 and the Allies have 7, because we have successfully moved Manila over into the Allied category. Well, as the player primarily responsible for the Soviets, I am not in love with our position. I don't know if we're going to be able to hold our capital city. And more than that, I'm worried about what other targets might become the focus of that huge column of Russian tanks. John, how did you feel about the Germans' position at the end of round 3?
I feel pretty good with where Germany's at. I think that Russia is in imminent danger. Now it's also how to help out Japan with UK and the US putting immense pressure on them. we'll see what happens.
Yeah, at this point in time, Japan is just fighting to survive. We've decided on 2 victory cities that we are going to try to protect, and now it's just reinforcing those and trying to hold through the rest of the tournament.
Doug, where you at?
My thoughts, I'm very, very concerned for our position. To me, Russia is as good as gone. The capital's going to get taken. I'm not convinced that the Allies have enough land units to take Shanghai. I think that's going to be really, really tricky. And I'm concerned that the Axis will actually have a shot at India, and that could be catastrophic for the Allies. So I feel like we're in a lot of trouble, and it's not looking good for us, is my take on it.
Yeah, while the Allies have taken the lead in the victory city count, this game is still very much up in the air. There is no doubt about that. At the end of round 3, we've got a clock that's telling us that we've got an hour and 34 minutes left to play, and anything can happen. This is one of the closest games I have ever seen, and it legit comes down to the very last roll of the dice. And there's some twists and turns here that I don't think I've ever seen before, but we'll have to save all that for part 2. Yes, I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there for now. I hope that you will tune in for part 2, if only to find out if I ever am able to get even an average roll in the final match of the World Championships. John, Adam, thank you very much for joining us today. We really appreciate you sharing your insights with us. We look forward to having you back for part 2 of this crazy, crazy game.
Thanks for having us.
Gary, Doug, thanks very much for having us.
All right, guys. Thanks again. See you soon. Doug, brother, I felt like we were pretty good at this game. And then we did some kind of dumb things here. And apparently I broke a mirror or stepped on a cat or something because, man, now I'm a guy who spent 20 years in the casino business, and I'm struggling to think of an instance where the odds were so completely upended. Pair that with some of the just crazy mistakes that we made, and I'm surprised that we're still even in this game.
Yeah, it was bad. I think there was even one round in one of those battles where it was like, all right, I'm just going to roll some dice, and I threw some dice and maybe did just as poorly as you, and then you took the dice back over. Again, like I mentioned, very concerned for the Allies' position, but great game, fantastic opponents, and yeah, excited about the next video.
All right, Doug, thanks for being here. We will see you next time.
Appreciate the time, Gary, and always love doing this.
A quick thank you to David Skelly for putting together the odds calculator that we've used for this series. You can find a link to that in the description. A big thank you again, of course, to today's sponsor, Renegade Games. To learn more about everything that they have to offer, please visit your local game store or the link below. And thank you for watching part 1 of our walkthrough of the finals of the 2023 Axis and Allies World Championship. Before you go, please take a second and hit that like button for us, maybe subscribe to the channel. When part 2 is ready, you'll find it right here. You need a playlist for all the videos in this series? This one's for you. For our latest bit of mayhem, right this way. And if you're ready to join Board Game Nation, click here to subscribe. My name is Gary Blevins. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.